and girls. Welcome back to Deep Thoughts. As you can tell, today we're going to go into a very eccentric topic, one that has utterly exploded on the internet recently. And for those of you who might be finding this for the very first time, or you're just a member of the MK Ultra clan and you're new, and you didn't see our 100th episode or listen to it on Flat Earth, I thought I would revisit Flat Earth because I listened to kind of what we recorded, and, you know, we go through some of the science, but it was sort of, we didn't really get a chance to elaborate because it was more me informing Kyle about the theory. So I wanted to put that aside and sort of come at it from a few different angles, because it's fascinating to me that we would, in 2015, be recontemplating the mechanism by which we are held to this planet and the world that we live in. And it may be true that we're not on a heliocentric ball, and it might be true that we are on a ball. But way before we get to the science of the flat Earth, I just wanted to examine for a second what feeds this curiosity and this willingness to ask the question, because I think it's actually very, very healthy, regardless of where this theory ends up, right? Before I forget, the scientist that I'm yet to have an in-depth questioning session with did admit that he did not cross over the Antarctica in his visit to the Antarctica. He simply visited, flew next to it, and flew back home. So I'm 0 for 0 when it comes to people that have actually traveled over the Antarctica on a plane. I haven't found anybody who's claimed to have done it. It just gets weirder and weirder. That's all I gotta say. It's just weirder and weirder, right? But let's talk about what feeds this. There's probably a lot of things that feed the flat Earth theory. And interestingly enough, I could come at it from the bottom up, that it was the first theory of how our world was created. And every religion on planet Earth started with flat Earth. Every single one of them. I'm going to bring this mic down. I'm trying to see if I can cut down on the breathing sounds that go into the mic. We know that in the past we've had theories to explain things that we didn't understand. And we know that they were silly. We just do, right? And that we like to think that we have figured out how certain things work. And that sort of makes us feel comfortable. You all know this is the way it works, right? Okay. But I think it's more interesting to approach the flat Earth theory from the top down as opposed to the historical, traditional belief systems up. And there's one reason, but NASA is the number one reason why people are capable of contemplating the flat Earth in 2015. And you might go, what are you talking about? NASA says the world is round. Why on earth would NASA be responsible for flat Earth taking off? Because NASA has lied so much about so many things for so long that everything that they say is true is immediately called into question, and it's exploded in this last 12 months. The jig is up. NASA has a death sentence. It has a death serum in its blood. It's like Snake Plissken in New York City counting down the rest of his life. Right? If he doesn't rescue the president, he's going to die. That's NASA right now. And nobody knows exactly how long NASA has, but they have their days numbered. Any one of you who work for NASA understand you're living on a prayer. And by proxy, Jet Propulsion Laboratories also has a death sentence over their head. And all I mean by saying death sentence is that the truth and the integrity that has been associated with those two organizations is starting to wane heavily. And maybe through the Army Corps of PsyOps, the group that we pay billions of dollars to lie to us every single day and to bully us online from ever having an original thought, right? You get a tinfoil hat comment on any video regarding these subject matters, it's someone being paid to do that as for a living. And it could be a bot, an automated script on the internet that simply finds subjects and they insert their little comment in there. Whatever, it's the same group. But the main Achilles heel that gets this thing rolling is that NASA has never produced convincing photographs of the Earth from space. What's interesting about it is that you will argue with that in your mind immediately, like, well, oh my God, there absolutely are several photographs out there of the planet Earth. I've seen them, is what you'll tell yourself. And then when you pull them up, you realize it's the same photograph, cropped differently or color balanced differently. The same continent map will show up on all these other photographs that you think were new ones. It's the old ones. The artists from NASA who have defected out of NASA who've said, look, like there's one guy named Matt, I think his name is Matt Balin or something like that. He used to do this for a living, according to him. And regardless if he's done it for a living, and if let's just say he was a liar, which I don't think he is, but if he were, he's still pointing out all the photographs on the internet and showing you the anomalies of the lies of these photographs. Showing you that in a single photograph of Earth, you have one cloud storm formation, where the clouds have gone to a certain random pattern. And those patterns have been cut and pasted 4 times over the planet Earth in the same shot. Because the creativity of a NASA artist, I guess, is really low at this point, right? When you try to get people to lie to other people, what would be the integrity of someone who tells a lie? Not someone who usually has the integrity to build up any skills, because skills are only discovered and created within a person through discipline and integrity, usually, right? He also showed a beautiful animation that NASA claimed was a 12-hour time lapse of the Earth rotating. Okay, well, in all the frames of this 12-hour rotation, which, by the way, wasn't fluent, right? There'd be no reason why it couldn't take a fluent, snapshot every, 10 minutes, and then at least the Earth rotates beautifully, right? No, in all the frames of animation over 12 hours, the storms on the surface of the Earth never moved 1 inch. Nothing changed on any of the surfaces. Now, I know what a lot of you think. You've seen this videos go around with supposedly from the space station or the space shuttle that show these gorgeous heliocentric orb Earths, and they show lightning storms, and they show the northern lights, reflecting off of the atmosphere. I'm just going to tell you right away, those can be faked in a computer so easily you have no idea. For any of you who think that's hard to simulate inside of a computer, go watch the movie Pacific Rim. Okay? If you don't own it and you don't want to rent it, go watch the trailer on YouTube, Pacific Rim. And every time you see a robot, well, it's fake. Most of you know that. But every time you see the ocean wrapping around that robot, it's not some kid inside a bathtub. The liquid dynamics of ocean have been utterly conquered for over a decade. Go see the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock and realize that the only thing that is real in that movie, besides the last shot where she gets to planet Earth, sorry for the spoiler, I think you know what's going to happen, but everything in space and Earth and all the hands and the astronaut outfits and everything around every single shot is computer rendered, except the face and the hands, until she gets inside of a capsule and starts undressing. And I believe the capsule is probably real inside, but all the outside shots are completely rendered in a computer. So it'd be naive to say that they can achieve utter convincing photorealism. Planet of the Apes, the last 2 movies of Planet of the Apes, well, the apes aren't real, but you think they're real? They look fucking real, right? Right? Transformers, they look real, but they're not real. Jurassic Park, they look real, but they're not real. So in terms of putting in a computer what it takes to make, fake images of Earth, it's extremely easy. But what's really, really weird is they haven't attempted to create a spherical ball image of Earth that is entirely fake. And the thing is we have supposedly 30,000 functioning satellites in orbit around space, in orbit on Earth right now in space. Why can't they crank out a shot every single day of the Earth? I mean, the whole thing. Some excuse me, I was about to say heliocentric, some geocentric orbit satellite that's 35,000 miles out taking a picture of Earth. Earth only has a diameter of 8,000 miles, so if you're 35,000 miles out, roughly, you should be able to get the Earth in a shot and nothing flat. But it's this lack of evidence from NASA over the course of the 40-plus years that they've supposedly been able to take these shots that is fueling this. It's the first ingredient in the mind of a person once they realize that NASA's lied about these things that gets this theory going. For those of you who have the guts, okay, to research the moon landings and the hoax of the moon landings, you realize they lied about every single mission. We've never been to the moon. The Orion project at NASA is still trying to figure out how to put human flesh through the Van Allen belts, which is only 1,000 miles up. The first Orion mission to figure out how to build a capsule so humans could go through this belt without dying didn't have any humans in it because they knew they would die. All right, well, supposedly we went through it 7 times. If you count Apollo 13. Probably 8 times if you count Apollo 10, which went up, circled the moon supposedly, and came back. And a 1/4-inch aluminum capsule. Well, must be a reason why NASA lost all the footage of all the moon missions. Must be the reason why NASA lost the schematics of the Saturn V. It must be why the F-1 booster rockets that were in the Saturn V were never revealed to the outer world how they worked, because they didn't have the pounds per square inch to get this thing out of orbit of Earth. Everything was concealed where it counted. And go see episode 26 if you have any questions about the moon missions. All right, I'm not going to repeat that here. But the other thing might be that this theory is a plant. Maybe it's a psychological operation of its own. And maybe the people that are at the forefront, the tip of the spear, who seem to have all this time to create movies and documentaries and books on this subject, maybe they're plants. Maybe they're here to orchestrate it. You know? I'm just throwing that out there. That's what shills are. They have an amazing amount of time in their life to dedicate to one theory. It's crazy. We're going to do that too. But what would be the benefit of harvesting human beings that are willing to believe a flat Earth after we have, I think, observable evidence that most of the bodies in space are round? Well, you'd find a bunch of gullible people. But you'd also find, and I don't mean to make that insulting, okay? Because I'm going to get into flat Earth, and I'm going to say that there are things that I don't understand either that seem to really call into question what we've been told. So I'm not against flat Earth. I'm just not quite there yet. All right. But we have to look at it from every single angle, especially if we're going to come on board with something so counterintuitive to what we've been brought up to believe. And maybe it's just indoctrination that's got us into this belief system. But we need to have the courage to take it easy and relax and make sure we're not making a huge mistake and spending our life in this. But I have to say, I don't think it's a mistake to research anything, even if it is ridiculous in the end. And even if you do come up with it in the end and you don't believe it, hey, that's progress. I think I've said that in one of my other episodes, right? But the other thing that it finds is a bunch of open-minded people. And you don't need to look very, very far back in history to realize that open-minded people have been persecuted and killed each time a country wants to rise up against its people. You know, China. China killed all of its landlords at one point when Mao rose up. And then they got rid of academics, which were essentially called, opposition. Anyone who understood the dictatorship that Mao was setting up in an otherwise new democracy, as he said, were murdered. And the peasants, the mob rule peasants, the low IQ mouth breathers stood up and bound these landlords and bound these intellectuals and cut their heads off and killed them in public. Should give you a bit of an understanding why that area of the world really struggles with creativity, why all they do is manufacture other people's ideas, because the thinkers of China were entirely wiped out. I don't mean entirely wiped out, and I do believe the kids are starting to nourish their individuality. But here this is a global thing. Anybody can watch a flat Earth video on YouTube, Anytime you watch a video on YouTube, well, the powers that be know that you watch the video. You know, your IP address identifies you wherever you are in the world, and they know. Especially if you sign up and make an account, they know. And it's not like they're going to come lynch you in the middle of the night, but, I think it should be relatively bottom feeder knowledge to know that there is a database in the world, several, that track the psychological profile, and it builds a profile on each one of us based on our behaviors on the internet. That's how they find a lot of these patsies to blame all these things on. They just find a person that mathematically is exactly the kind of person that they need to be a patsy for whatever crime they want to commit and blame on somebody else to take away our rights. So the flat earth thing might actually fold into that agenda to say we're trying to find people who are open-minded. And maybe they think, obviously if they do have satellites and they're out there looking at a heliocentric world and they're like, look at these fools believing that it's flat again. How easy was that? And all we had to do to get them to consider such a thing was to essentially prove that we faked a bunch of stuff. So literally the negativity in their history that they faked a bunch of stuff, or they wouldn't let us see, the real stuff, is feeding the agenda for us to not only doubt them, but to supplant their theories with this other theory that might be just as ludicrous. I don't know. I'm not telling you it's one way or the other. I haven't been in space and looked at Earth that I know of, right? So let's get into the flat Earth theory. Now, I hope some of you are new to this, even though we did our 100th episode on it. I hope some of you are new to this so you can have a fun time with this. And again, I'm not coming in from some superiority complex view to say, oh, I know it's heliocentric and you flat earthers are stupid, because I'm sort of on the fence with some of these issues. I think what has been called into question quite vividly is that a lot of the science and a lot of the cause and effect measurements and observations in the world have been nearly completely proven incorrect. And what do I mean by that? I mean that things that they say would happen if we were on a round Earth don't seem to be happening. Things that they say that would happen if it was spinning 1,000 miles an hour don't appear to be happening. Things that they say would happen if the Earth was supposedly, screaming through the universe and through the galaxy don't seem to pan out with some of the observable photographs that we take. There are a lot of things that it doesn't explain, such as other planets that we can see through telescopes in our backyards, not through observatories that could be faking it, but through really expensive telescopes in backyards. I've personally seen Saturn with its rings. I saw it in my buddy's backyard. He did not rig it up to give me the illusion that flat Earth is the way it works. I've never even heard that theory until this year. I mean, seriously contemplated, right? But because on this show we try to keep our minds open, let's go for it, right? Now you might think, if you're like me, you're thinking there's no way you're ever going to convince me, ever, that this is a flat Earth. But I think that what feeds that rejection or that protectionism against I guess you could say the credentials that you've built up as a human being would be that you wouldn't want to be embarrassed by coming up with that story. And I think that makes complete sense. The other side of it is that you've been raised with round Earth, round heliocentric Earth, and so any other theory is going to sound crazy. The other one is that we've been raised with the history that people who are called flat earthers are crazy. That's what we've been raised with. So there's all kinds of resistance towards any other theory. Okay. I want to get out of the way theories that make me believe that it is round. When they show us the map of the planet Earth, which, again, if you study a bunch of map makers, they will admit that the typical globes, which are sold in stores and featured in libraries or schools, they have admitted, okay, at the top levels of map making, that those globes were finalized before they really figured out the proportions of how big the continents are. And there is a very special map, and I forgot what they call it. There's a really weird word associated with it, which is the map that they say this is the true dimensions of all of the continents. And it's a little bit different. It's a little wonky. In fact, Africa looks a little more stretched out vertically than it is horizontal. And so that's always an unnerving thing to realize, well, it is round, but God, these things are not the size and shapes that we've grown to know them as. It's disturbing to realize that we had bad map technology that's on all the globes. And that's just official story stuff. That's not a conspiracy. I watched a video of somebody did like a little Vice. It wasn't Vice, but some little side show, like a fully public mass media show, went to some scientific group, and they were told about this other map of round Earth, and they were shown the true shape of all the continents, and they said, no, this is really what's closer to really being. And these people freaked out. They didn't get into hysterics, but they were just looking with their jaws dropped. They're like, oh my God, really? That looks measurably different than what I realized. And it's not crazy. It's not like it's all different shapes. It's a little weird. So that's something that you should keep in the back of your head. But there's a theory that I believe wholeheartedly, okay, for many, many reasons, and it's dovetailing with a lot of the cosmology that we are now re-engineering, which is the expanding Earth theory. The expanding Earth theory is based on the fact that we know the world expands. What's that mean? Well, the globe that is Earth, whatever diameter it really is, they put it around 7,900 miles, okay? It expands 19 centimeters a year. The whole Earth expands 19 centimeters a year, roughly. And it increases in speed over time, all right? The way that they know this is true is, one, they measure it, but two, when you shrink up all the oceans on planet Earth, right? The oceans are the new soil of Earth. The continents are the old soil of Earth, right? And they teach you this Pangea drift theory, which is loosely based on the idea that, when you take Africa and South America and you can fit them together like puzzles, right? What you don't maybe realize is that the whole thing, if you get rid of all the oceans, the whole thing, take the Pangea drift theory. We have these continents all pushed together in one big continent, right? You can shrink the other remaining part of the ocean and bring the whole thing together in a beautiful, beautiful ball. If you need to see it, go to YouTube, search on Expanding Earth, Neil Adams. He narrates this computer animation where he doesn't change the shape of the continents, but he gets rid of the oceans, which again are the new surfaces, and it comes together beautifully. Now, if it's a flat Earth, then that completely contradicts any sort of flat Earth theory, because it all comes together on all edges. All right. The only thing that would remotely still dovetail into flat Earth would be that this thing was undone. It was all together in a ball, and then someone, undid it and laid it down on a flat surface. That's your number one piece of evidence that flat Earth isn't true. And what feeds expanding Earth? Just to give it a little bit more, because I'm saying expanding Earth, and you're going, dude, what are you, nuts? Like, what is this? Well, the shrinking thing in the video that Neil Adams prepared is pretty much conclusive for anyone. I've shown it to intellectuals who have briefed Rothschild people, and they said, God, it's really hard to contradict that. It looks so fucking obvious that it's expanding, that it did expand, right? Expanding Earth is based on the fact that the center of all bodies in the universe are plasma energy. Tesla proved in Colorado, when he built his gigantic Tesla coil in Colorado, that he sent just infinitesimal amount of electricity down into the Earth's crust, and he brought out an infinite amount of electricity and had a standing lightning bolt for 60 seconds. For his money and for his science, and he understood electricity better than anyone who has ever lived on planet Earth. Okay, they don't teach you about him, but he invented, and discovered alternating current. He was drawing from the bowels of the plasma ball that is at the center of the Earth, which feeds this electromagnetic belt around Earth. They tell you it's nickel because nickel can be electrically charged and have a similar property. Okay, but it's ridiculous. The sun is a plasma ball. Sunspots are looking into the bowels of the dark center of a plasma ball, and the Earth has it too. When Earth mountains jostle in the deserts, plasma energy balls pop out. They've tracked these 100 times, and they're filmed, and they look like UFOs, because when plasma energy is visible to the human eye in an atmosphere, it acts like a mirror, because it's reflecting all the light that bounces into it. So it looks like a chrome sphere or ball. If it spins really, really fast, it starts to create an equator looking like a disc. All right. When it interacts with the electrical charges of the atmosphere, it tends to find negative pressures in the atmosphere, and it travels 1,000 miles in one direction and then finds a negative pocket and stops. And then it travels 1,000 miles in another direction, etc. You can see these on radar because radar bounces off of them just like light bounces off of them. So a lot of the UFO sightings that you've seen reported by the Navy and people watching them are simply plasma balls that pop out of the desert, which is what happens in remote areas, because it's a desert area. We can't live there because the rock formations forbid us from building homes on them without spending a lot of energy to smooth them out. That's why that happens. Okay, you can look down the seam of the Atlantic and the seam of the Pacific, and there is look down the middle, and you'll find a seam down both oceans where the new crusts are coming out. There's a scientist who's been tracking this for 25 years using NASA satellites to track these plates. All right? Because everything's electric in the universe, and all the modern cosmologists of today's era have thrown out all of the old theories, and they found this ecosystem of electricity that binds us all together, that creates the potentially the gravity wells that displaces ether, that holds us all together. We have a direct relationship with all of their bodies. All right, but these seams were weak. That's how the oceans essentially, when the Earth needed to expand, it found the weakest fault lines in Earth, and there was two. One that became the Atlantic, one that became the Pacific. The Pacific was weaker, so it grew faster, right? If you take a piece of cloth and you pull it with like big robot arms that are not going to lose the fight, right? Whatever anomaly is in the cloth is going to break first. The weakest link in the cloth is going to break first, and that's exactly how the Earth's crust broke. Okay, so back in the age of the dinosaurs, all right, if our carbon dating of dinosaur bones is correct, the Earth was about 1/4 the size, thus 1/4 the gravity, thus dinosaurs could be gigantic creatures and dragonflies could be 3.5 feet long. The atmosphere was most likely extremely dense, creating a very lush world, allowing an insect that doesn't have lungs to still metabolize enough oxygen to get gigantic. The reason why insects can't get big today is because they don't have lungs. They've got patties that metabolize oxygen through little perforated spots on their body. Insects are bigger in the jungle and the rainforest because the oxygen is very thick, because there's a lot of oxygen metabolism, from chlorophyll plants. Thus, and it gets held down inside of the canopy of organic life, and that's why you get a 1-foot spider in the jungle or a rainforest, right? And that's why the ants in your backyard and the spiders that crawl in your house are little teeny tiny things. The more lush and moist a world is, the bigger those insects get. It all dovetails together beautifully. German scientists have tracked the age of the ocean by reverse engineering the salt accumulation over the years, and they put the oceans at about 60 million years old, plus or minus 5 million. Those are pretty young oceans, all right? Reason why we think there's a lot of earthquakes happening all around the world is because Earth might be in the need to expand once more, you know? So that's just one theory that really, really dovetails beautifully with a heliocentric Earth. That doesn't account for some things I'm going to mention here. Okay, there's contradictory things to the heliocentric thing that comes out of the flat Earth theory. So, and for those of you who believe in flat Earth, and maybe you're the head tip of the activism, and you know you're not a shill, we're going to get to your stuff right away here. So the first thing that's tough for people to understand is, what does anyone mean by flat Earth? If you've never heard it before, what's the physical model that they're thinking of? Because if we think about the old flat Earths, we think about the Kansas album cover where it's essentially a square or something, and there's just an edge, and all the oceans are falling off the edge. Thinking that can't happen because the oceans don't fall off the planet Earth. They don't drain anywhere, right? The best way to think about this theory that's currently being asserted is to look at the UN logo. The United Nations logo is a round logo with all the continents spreading out from center. Okay, and then what they have in their logo is a bunch of 2 olive branches that represent peace around the outer edge. What the flat earthers believe is that the Earth is a disk. Okay, all the continents are spread out from the center, just like the UN logo. Just go look it up. But around the outer edge, instead of being a parameter where the oceans fall off into the abyss, right? The Antarctica, instead of being a circular thing at the bottom of a globe, all right, it is a parameter around the outside of this disk, all right? Now, think about, and if that sounds crazy, let me just give you an analogy of what you would visually see if you said, well, no, a sailor's gone down to Antarctica and they've sailed around the entire parameter of Antarctica, and they've come back to the mainland. Colonel Byrd did this in the 40s and 50s, right? I think even maybe the tail end of the 30s. Well, if you had an island and you put your boat up against it and you just started sailing around the island, it's a big island, right? It's the size of what is currently pitched to us as Antarctica. You're going to have a side of your ship that has this landmass to it and an ocean to the other side of your ship. And you're going to go around the island. And you're just going to go around and around. And the bigger the island is, the less of a curve you're actually going to notice on this continent. But what if you were going on the inside of a really massive, massive circle? Again, it's so massive you don't really see the curvature. But if you go around an island, if you put a buoy in the ocean with an anchor and a big red flag going like this, and you go around the island, you're going to come back to your flag. Okay. Well, the same would be true if you put the buoy in the ocean and you sailed around the inside of a perimeter. You would come back to the red flag. And you might, and I have not done it, so I don't know, you might have the illusion you've gone around a continent, but all you've done is gone around the inside parameter of an ice shield, of an ice barrier around the inside of this encapsulated circle. So, just to reiterate, UN logo, ice around the outer edge. And they say the illusion that it's an island is that you can sail around the outer edge and come back to the same spot. Same exact thing you would have with a big island in the center of the ocean. I mean, a big island, right? Okay. Then you might ask yourself, well, how's the sun work? How's the moon work? Because that's the next big question. When I thought of flat Earth, what I thought was whatever plane shape they created, the sun was actually going up and over this plane, going underneath this flat Earth and coming back up the other side. And that's how we were seeing day in and day out, right? What they're saying is this. The sun in your round UN logo, take the UN logo and go about halfway in to where you might see the equator band in the center. For those of you who remember records, it would essentially be the outer parameter of the label on the center. Okay? What they believe is that the sun and the moon are in opposite orbits. They're in the same orbit, but they're on opposite sides of the same orbit. And they're essentially chasing each other in this circle. Over this flat plane, they're in the center of the flat plane. They're not going up and over the plane and underneath the plane. They're in the center, looping around 3,200 miles in the air. So like Kyle said, it's a shorter distance to the sun than it is to England, to London, England, from America. Well, automatically you have to take the sun and shrink it down to be really, really small compared to what we think it is in space with the heliocentric model. Then you might say, well, how is there ever nighttime? If the sun is always over this plane, how would there ever be nighttime? Well, the difference is instead of being an ambient, spotlight, an ambient light that basically shines equal light in all directions, they're saying that the sun is more like a spotlight. So it only lights a really, localized region underneath it. And as it goes out of view, as it rotates out of your hemisphere of this disk, right, that you can't see it at all. You can't see it because it's way off the vanishing line, and it's only pointing down, so you don't get the sun in your area. And because when the sun goes away, here comes the moon, it's over us in a different way. So hopefully you see this in your brain. UN logo, ice barrier on the outside, the sun and the moon chasing each other towards the center, behaving more like a spotlight. The moon definitely appears to be reflecting wherever the sun is. And there's people that have a problem with that too. They think the moon is fake. They think it's a self-illuminating object. They think because the atmosphere reflects off of light before you actually see the moon, that it's transparent because it has a blue haze in front of it during the day, and they think that means you can see through it. I think that's completely wrong. Okay, whatever that thing is, it's reflecting light from the sun. It's not transparent just because it has blue on it. But there are some interesting photographs of the moon, which I have to see this personally to believe it, but there are photographs of the moon with stars that seem to appear through the moon while this sort of hazy, transparent illusion is occurring. Now, if any of those photographs are real, okay, just look up a star shining through the moon. If any of those are real, then the moon is a bizarre object. Now, the moon's a bizarre object regardless, and I'm going to try to get into that too. It just is. Even if it's heliocentric globe, it's too big for our planet. It happens to be the exact size to eclipse the sun. It always seems to show us the single face of the moon. Never shows us the backside of the moon. All right? There's an interesting theory, I should say, that it is a old dormant sun. And I thought, that seems pretty sci-fi. It's just a great story that the sun, or that the moon was the first sun that we had, or maybe we had a dual sun at one point, but it was an old sun light bulb and it burned out. And I thought, it's baseless. It's just some guys with his idea. But then when I realized that the moon tends to show us the same face, I thought, well, maybe that is the front of the bulb, where you look at a bulb and it says how many watts is on it and who manufactured a GE logo in the center. And the fact that the moon eclipses and turns away from us and that kind of stuff starts to break the directional properties of it being a bulb. But maybe it turned off and then it lost its direct pointing down mechanism, and so it does kind of wobble around, whatever. Okay. But now, let me give you some of the biggest evidence that I think calls into question the heliocentric model, at least as it is portrayed to us, that we circle the sun and the sun goes around the galaxy and the galaxy is flying through the universe. We have a problem that when we take photographs of the sky at night, and astronomers do this all the time, they put their camera on what's called a bulb exposure. Back in the film days, right, before it's digital, and I guess digital has the same properties today. But you essentially open up the shutter, and you put it on a tripod, you open up the shutter, and you film the stars for the course of an evening. When you develop the photograph, or I guess look at it in your camera, you have this perfect spiral around the North Star, okay? And all of the stars are circling around the North Star. And we explain that to kids, and I was told this when I was a kid. It's because the Earth is spinning, and of course, everything in the space is going to spin around the upper axis of Earth and the lower axis of Earth. And so, of course, all the stars are going to spin in a beautiful circle. And that made sense until someone pointed out that not only does the Earth spin supposedly 1,000 miles around her, which gives us a 24-hour time frame because the circumference of Earth is around 24,000 miles, around an 8,000 wide ball, okay, that we're also going around the sun at the same time. And so this spinny photograph of all these stars in the sky should have a bit of a wobble, just a tiny infinitesimal wobble, because we're also going around the sun at the same time the Earth is spinning. Now, maybe, I haven't done the math on this, not even sure how to do the math on this, but maybe it's because the Earth is spinning so much faster than the orbital pattern around the sun with the old heliocentric model that it just doesn't wobble enough within 24 hours or within the 8 hours the shot's being taken, right? Because you can only do it at nighttime wherever you are, right? But maybe within 8 hours or whatever it takes to rotate, we don't see it. Still a little suspect, right? the weird thing is that we know that something is spinning because this photograph reveals stuff spins in space. So you have to then go to two different models, one of two different models. We're spinning or the stars are spinning. Okay, that would mean the sky is spinning, right? That old flat earth thing where all the stars are painted on the inside of a dome. That's how the scientists first thought up all the stars. And then when they realized that we have orbital bodies called Jupiter and Mars and Saturn and all these guys, Venus, they're spinning at different rates. And so they said that there were spheres connected to the sphere of the outer painting of the stars, and they spin at their own rates. And that's how they were able to figure out that they spin differently. It starts to get really messy and gross because then those bodies have moons, and so you have to put little spheres on those spheres. It started to get to be kind of ridiculous to most people, which is why heliocentric starts to really take effect in the mind once you start thinking this thing through. And that would be the problem that the flat earthers would have to explain as well, which I've never heard explained really, with any convincing explanation besides to say, well, that's just what they did. Right. I don't know why that would be the case. But here's a weird one. Here's a really strange one. And it may be related to the relativity of stars in our galaxy because the galaxy itself is spinning. So everything that we see in the close proximity of about the 1,200 stars that we can see with the naked eye, 2,500 if you acclimate and go way into the desert where there's no light pollution, right? What we see in the sky tends to stay in the same place. There's all kinds of structures around the world that have been built to find the equinox and the solstice, which are these very specific moments and quarters throughout the year of where stars appear in the sky throughout a year in quarters. So you might be thinking, well, what exactly do you mean? All right. Most of you are familiar with the constellation Orion. Orion looks like a warrior with three little stars for his belt, which just happened to map down to the pyramids on the Giza Plateau, right? And he's got four stars that create his body, and he supposedly has he's an archer, so he's got a bow, and he's shooting, I believe it's Sirius is the tip of his arrow, the brightest star in the sky. And if we were to pick any one of the three stars in his belt, in Orion's belt, and let's say it's wintertime, we can see him in the sky, and I'm on my patio here, and I create a tube. I just go get a tube, right? And I put a little mirror in the bottom, and I cut a little hole in the tube so I can look sideways, and it's like a little, scope where I can see up. And I have a box of cement, right? And I put the tube in there, and it's wet cement. We're gonna fix this thing in place. We got a little, I forgot what the hell they call it, but the little periscope that submarines use. Right, you look into it like this, and you can see up and out. But we just have our tube being like a little reflector telescope. Okay. I take the tube and I point it at, say, the center star of Orion's belt, and I hold it in place on that particular day. I know that on let's put it this way, December 25th, right? The winter solstice, that the Orion's belt's there, we got a clear sky, and I freeze that pipe in place. So it's got the center star of Orion's belt in my pipe, and it's the center of my mirror, just staying there looking at it. Next year, we know that on the same day, same time of day, that star is going to appear right inside my mirror because it's going to be in the same position because we're going to rotate, and it should be there. Well, that's what actually happens, all right? And that can be explained by the fact that there's relative movement in the galaxy, and everything is moving kind of, it's like traffic. You're all going 60, 70 miles an hour, but everyone's going the same miles per hour, so the car next to you, even though you're all moving, is still right next to you. If you keep looking at your passenger window, there's the other car, right? Let's say you travel for 10,000 years, and you've been turning, your sun's been turning, you've been going around your sun, and the sun's been blasting through the galaxy. You would think that a few of these stars, maybe not the constellation stars, maybe constellation stars are so close it's not a big deal, but you'd think some of the stars in the sky due to parallaxing, due to rotation, due to variable speeds of flying through the galaxy. And the only thing we're really suggesting to solve this problem is that everything in the galaxy is at a constant speed. Nothing is moving at a different speed. Or, by the way, the stuff that's closer to the center of the galaxy must be moving a little slower, and the stuff on the outer side of the galaxy is moving way faster, because that's what would have to be to keep everything in the same state in a rotating body, right? Instead of having like the drain, and the water down the drain of your bathtub, the center is going really, really fast. If you ever watch the bubbles go down the drain, the stuff on the outside is really slow. And then the inside starts whipping really, really fast and going down in there. Relatively speaking, they all could be going the same miles per hour, but as you create a vortex vector, that relative speed on the outer ring, pushed up to the center of the ring makes it go quicker because there's less distance to travel. But that doesn't appear to be happening in the galaxy because the stars always come back to the same places relative to these structures that are thousands of years old. A little weird that everything seems to line up in our pipe. No matter how many years goes by, those stars seem to be in the exact same spot. A little weird. I don't have an explanation for that. But it might be relative to the other theory that feeds a flat Earth. Now, I'm sitting on this patio right now, right? There, I'm going to let that cloud go into the edit. There's smoke coming off my cigar. And it's at its own relative speed once it leaves the cigar, but it's not showing any signs of going 1,000 miles an hour once it leaves the tip of my cigar. Now you might think, well, that's relative because the atmosphere is actually rotating also at whatever speed you're at, and therefore you don't feel the Earth turning. A lot of people are going, I think we would feel something if we're on a ball and the ball's turning supposedly at its equator, only at its equator, 1,000 miles an hour. Now, if you were to move the North Pole, say you're at the North Pole, standing on ice, and you're a foot away from the actual pole point, wherever it's even wobbled, don't worry about the wobble, but you're right there, wherever it is. If you move that little circle you're standing in, you just draw a circle around it, your longitude area. If you move that 1,000 miles an hour, well, then the equator is now moving several thousand miles an hour. You'd screw up the whole planet if you moved every single longitude at 1,000 miles an hour. It can't, on a sphere, move equal speeds. It just can't. It doesn't. So you got a bit of an anomaly to solve with the atmosphere supposedly rotating at this equal speed of the Earth's rotation to keep us from feeling movement. Now, some of you might be going, what the hell, you're losing me here. Okay, let's just think about this. The atmosphere has two dimensions of movement when it comes to being sucked down by gravity, which is going to be a fairly unified force around the entire globe, right? If this thing is spinning on like a top, okay, which, again, when you look out to the stars and you take that bold photograph of all the stars going in a circle, it seems very evident that we're spinning. Because if we're not spinning, then the stars are spinning. And because we think the galaxy is gigantic and the universe is gigantic, that doesn't work for us. It's too much stuff having to move very, very quickly in space to give us the illusion that we're spinning, but we're not. Okay. So we have a surface of Earth calculation of how fast the atmosphere would have to be moving. Let's just say in the first 20 feet from the surface of Earth to the top of this 20-foot parameter. And we know since the Earth goes up and down with mountains, and you can be in Colorado and be, 30,000 feet in the air, right? That this atmosphere would be moving at different velocities based on the gravitational pull of the atmosphere down to Earth. But we don't experience that, do we? Now, you might go on top of a skyscraper and it's a bit windy up there, all right? But it's not too far off from what it is on the ground. And you can still go to the top of the Empire State Building on a summer day and it doesn't feel crazy. There's not like a constant 20 mile an hour wind up there. People would be blown off the top of buildings for years if that was the case. All right. Well, we know, just plain old physics, that at the North Pole or the South Pole, the air would be moving nothing. It just would be moving nothing because it couldn't. It sure as hell couldn't move 1,000 miles an hour because it would knock you off the face of the planet, right? So at the equator, It'd be moving 1,000 miles an hour, and at the North Pole, it'd be moving nothing. And there'd be this variable algorithm from the equator, okay, all the way up to the North Pole or down to the South Pole, where the atmosphere would have to slow down because it's getting to the apex of the rotation point, right, of the spindle that we're supposedly rotating on. That's pretty amazing mathematics. That in all the variable adjustments of the atmosphere to the North Pole, that we're not getting gusts that every once in a while blow a semi completely off the face of the planet, or at least blow it a few states away. It never happens. So you have a unified gravitational force down to Earth, but we don't have any unified speed of the atmosphere being pulled to Earth, because we can't. It would kill us. Okay. The same algorithm for the surface of the Earth, keeping the atmosphere moving at the same diminishing rate down to 0 at the North Pole and 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, would also apply to the more vertical altitude you gain, because the gravity that holds things down becomes lighter and lighter and lighter very, very quickly, because gravity is a very weak force, the further that you go up. And so planes, which we do know the atmosphere thins out because it can't hold the atmosphere at those higher levels. But once a plane starts to leave the surface of Earth, one, it would have less gravity on it, even though it may be minuscule, but the atmosphere itself, being thinner, would start moving at a different velocity. Right? We're told that the jet streams way up above actually move faster up there than they move down here. Maybe that's true. Less gravity, but maybe, relatively speaking, the atmosphere is actually holding still, and we're moving really, really fast. So to our brains, the atmosphere is moving very, very quickly. But what's strange about it is that we know that the sun, with the traditional model, comes from the east and sets in the west. That's the way it's always been since we've been around, that we know of, right? All right. But the jet stream's hauling ass towards the east. So we would be essentially rotating really, really fast, and the atmosphere would be essentially holding still and look like it's going towards the east. Starts to make a little more sense. But the idea is we don't feel anything. When we travel around the world on the ground, we don't feel any major difference. But we would actually be slowing down our rotation considerably. All right? It's technically possible to get in a plane at the equator of the Earth, a nice private G5 jet, right? And you would be able to fly a certain miles per hour. It's not nautical miles, it's airspeed miles, right? Towards the North Pole. You could actually probably reach the North Pole within 24 hours, hauling ass in a G5. Well, as that plane draws a line directly towards the North Pole, its relative speed would have to adjust. Otherwise, it would start going too fast, right? So this G5 takes off at 1,000 miles an hour of rotation at the equator, and as it hauls ass towards the North Pole, it's, especially if it did a beeline straight up a latitude arc, right? Its side winds would be crazy. And it would be slowing down and slowing down. So if you pitch a plane at, say, 600 miles per hour at the equator, well, if you're still going 600 miles per hour at the North Pole, you'd have a relative problem because all the atmosphere at the North Pole simply cannot be traveling 1,000 miles an hour in a circle. It doesn't happen. So there's these weird anomalies with the mathematics that we've been taught as kids. And I don't have any explanation for that at all, right? And maybe there is a beautiful explanation, but man, I haven't heard anyone even try. I haven't heard anyone really try to debunk the flat Earth in any real serious capacity. I have seen a photograph, or a video that was taken off a flat earther's claim and debunked by a non-flat earther who said, look, you do see the curvature of the ocean. You don't see the bottoms of the hotels far, far away, even though this guy's trying to say, look, there's no curve to the ocean. He proved that you couldn't see you could see the windows, all right, in the hotel, but you couldn't see the cars at the base. And you would be able, if you could see a window, you should be able to see the bottom of the hotels if it is a flat earth, like they said. Okay, so you get me on this atmospheric thing. That's one of the biggest questions I have with how that works. Just need someone to explain it to me, right? All right, now let's talk about flight patterns. If you lived on a ball and you wanted to travel from the tip of Africa to the tip of South America. There's a couple ways you could do it. But if you're on a ball, there's logic applied to this game. If you're an airline, your goal is to spend the least amount of money to get passengers from point A to point B as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible, right? So you want to spend the least amount of money on fuel, and you want to get your plane turned back around to grab more passengers to charge more money to get them to a new location. That's just the basic responsibility of an airline. Well, you got some flat earthers that have called into question the fact that none of that actually occurs. Now, what's funny about this, when I explain it to people who have traveled the world, okay, I have a very close friend of mine who has been everywhere on planet Earth. I even had an old associate of mine in the film business who used to be the number one traveler for American Airlines, meaning he traveled more miles in a year than any other passenger on planet Earth. Unfortunately, I don't have access to him because he's a criminal. And not really a friend, he's an associate, a guy I knew. He travels around the world, but he always traveled in the center equator band. He would travel literally from one studio to another and these other banker institutions when he was on Wall Street, and he never went South Pole. But if you wanted to travel between these two tips, the shortest distance you would travel is over the Antarctica, from one tip to the other. It'd be a very short journey. But let's just say you are not going to do that. You want to travel across the ocean between the two. I think it's about I want to say it's around 5,000 miles or so. People say, well, maybe they just can't do it. Maybe there's not enough fuel to do it. Anyone who's flown to China from America or from Western America, I've flown from San Francisco to London 3 times back and forth, right? We never stopped to refuel. It was an 11-hour flight. It was 8,000 miles, okay? And when you go to China, it's even longer, right? I think it's about a 14-hour flight from some destinations without refueling. There's no reason to refuel going from the tip of Africa to the tip of South America. So you should be able to fly a straight line over, especially if it's a globe, because it would be the shortest distance between two paths. Cost you less, turn around the plane, get more passengers, and make more money. But it doesn't work like that. What happens is the plane actually starts flying up the continent edge, bounces off a North American proxy, and comes back down to the southern hemisphere. Why would they do that? Because those paths are 3 times, if not more than 3 times the distance, consuming 3 times the fuel, delaying the plane from turning around and grabbing more passengers and doing the flight again. But if you were to take the UN logo, all right, and you were to look at it, and you were to say, okay, plot me the closest, or the shortest distance between the tip of Africa to the tip of South America, you know that the fastest way to get there is straight across the center of this logo, which is exactly what we see on a heliocentric pattern, is that they, in a heliocentric, when you turn it into a ball, they go up towards the center and back down. Well, when you flatten the Earth out, it's a straight line. It's a straight line. It's not a wobbly line at all. And there is a refueling requirement because it does exceed the amount of fuel that these planes can actually fly before they run out of fuel. Big clue, something's weird. And if you were to try to fly on the UN logo from one tip to the other, you're going to fly the longest arcing path around this logo to the other side. And you would run out of fuel. Weird, right? Okay, so there's another weird anomaly. There's another weird anomaly that fuels this anomaly, okay? When you run those plane tracking applications, you know, you load them up on your phone. There's one called Plane Finder. You can load it right now on your phone, and you start to look at planes that travel in the southern hemisphere, which again in flat Earth is more space in the southern hemisphere on flat Earth than there is in the northern hemisphere because it's stretched out and widened out in a big round disc, right? You don't see planes flying over the ocean in the southern hemisphere because at no point would that be economical or technically possible due to fuel limitations. The guy that figured this out went and asked the FAA, why don't I see planes over the southern hemisphere? I mean, aren't they flying across oceans, right? And they didn't really have an excuse, but they did say that, well, what happens is as soon as a plane leaves a southern hemisphere continent and gets, I think it's like 50 aeronautical miles out, it disappears from the tracking software. And you're thinking, well, what about the families that we want to know where their people are? And, most of them are combing up the coast of these continents to go to that shortest distance on the flat Earth model to bounce back off something and come back down. So that's another huge question as to why that would be the case, right? And all we're looking for is explanations, very simple explanations. And I'm yet to find the videos that explain why this occurs, right? Now, we talk about the curvature of the Earth. And I didn't know this until this thing hit me this summer, actually this fall, was that every mile out from where you're standing, if you're standing on the same level, let's say the Earth had no bumps in it, right? Every mile out, the Earth should drop 8 inches. And so in 10 miles out, it should drop 80 inches. 100 miles out, it should drop 800 inches. You feel me? Okay. Well, there's people that have taken photographs now of really long distances where the Earth should curve so much, these cities, that they're like, one happens in Lake Michigan, I think what it is, and there's cities on both sides of Lake Michigan, but Lake Michigan is so wide that the city that one person is taking a photograph from across Lake Michigan, which is 60 miles plus, should be invisible because it's going to rotate down. If nothing else, the buildings on a sphere should not be perpendicular to each other in photographs. It should be tilted away like this because there's a bit of a curvature to the Earth. It was a famous situation where a guy took a picture of, I believe, the Chicago city landscape, right? And he took it from so far away that he shouldn't have been able to get the city in his frame, but he did. And what they said is that it was essentially a mirage, that the curvature of light bounces over the atmosphere, and it basically carries the light around the curve so the guy could actually see it. And there may be actually reasons that you can do that are not related to a mirage, because a mirage typically creates glass reflections of the atmosphere as well, and it starts to look like there's a pool of water. When you're in the desert, it looks like a pool of water far away, and that's where you get the mirage, where people were chasing water holes that don't exist, and they would end up dying in the desert, right? Well, this one particular photograph is clean, clear-cut picture of Chicago, shrunk down as far as it would be from 60 miles in a flat plane perspective. Another crazy anomaly to explain, right? And that's just one photograph. But now, again, like I said, someone did do a videotape at some exotic location, and they were able to prove that other people debunking this footage were able to prove, look, you can't see the base of those buildings, so it does look like it curved down. Now, what I don't understand is that they actually said on the news that the whole city would be out of view due to the curvature of the Earth. And I don't understand that, because 60 times 8, right, is not going to produce enough inches down. Was it 480 inches down, right? You still, what is 480 inches? It's not that far down. Okay, you're still going to see freaking skyscrapers, and you may not notice the fact that you can't see the taxi cab on the bottom of the building. But it's not feet. It's not 480 feet gone. It's just some inches gone. But there was a famous experiment a guy did back in the 1800s where he had a stream and some survey equipment, and he sailed down this stream, a very straight stream. I forgot where it was exactly, but you can look this up. But he put little red flags of the same altitude off the ground every mile for like 8 or 9 miles or something like that. And then he took a survey telescope and he shot a straight line out, and he was able to see the top of the flag of the furthest flag out without adjusting for curvature on the Earth. Seems like even if it dropped a few inches, it would still be way down, 8 miles out. 8 times 8, 64 inches down. Well, he shouldn't be able to see it that easily, but he did. He saw every single one of the flag tops. How do you explain that? I don't know. There are people that have supposedly defected out of the Navy that say that all the artillery calculations, the calculus that Napoleon was so good at to send an artillery shell to another part of the Earth, actually doesn't compensate for the curvature of the Earth, even though the Navy says they do. I got a buddy who's a sniper, and I forgot to ask him, but there's snipers that are supposed to come out and said that they don't compensate for the curvature of the Earth. But then some of the training material says they do. So we need to resolve these conflicts and claims versus what is actually occurring, right? Another one of the big ones is that we talked about the sun just being 3,200 miles up. And I forgot what the distance of the sun, the diameter of the sun would be at 3,200 miles based on what we see. But sailors around the world have used sextants, which is just this little tool with a plumb bob, and they can it doesn't have a plumb bob, but it basically tracks, perpendicular to the Earth's surface where they are, and they start to figure out how far away things are. Well, they have pointed at the sun for the 2,000 years that we know the sextant has existed. And again, remember, we found this device at the bottom of, I think, the Black Sea or something in the Mediterranean, which was a beautiful machine that actually calculated the distance, calculated the sort of longitude, latitude positioning of where you are on the Earth based on time and where the stars are and all this other stuff in the time of Christ, So we had amazing technology back in the past, we know for a fact. But they're the ones that actually first calculated that the sun's about 3,200 miles in the sky. Now, I wasn't there. I don't know if that's true or not, but, that's what a sextant, if you brought it up today and pointed at the sun, that's what you get. Now, the other one is based on that particular theory of the sun being very close to the surface of the Earth, which would mean you just adjust it all down. You adjust its brightness down. You adjust its fireball emissions, its heat, all the way down to the point where it is a smaller object. It puts out less heat. The coronal mass ejections may be happening, but they're not happening at the massive scale that we think it is, being a 93 million mile away, huge ball of hydrogen helium, right, with the electric core. And for those of you who are still struggling with the electric core of the sun, remember that they told you the sun is a ball of hydrogen that's burning. Just remember that, 40% of the sun's surface is helium. Okay. They never really tell you about helium being at the center of the sun. But a sunspot, all right, is a negative area on the surface of the sun that is black for all intents and purposes. When you filter out the ambient sun filling in that hole from light traveling like a wave, once you filter that out, you start seeing these holes on the sun. And when the holes on the sun, the sun spots, start to occur, we get a lot more coronal mass ejections around those spots and on the surface of the sun, and that's what heats us up. So in 2003, when the world was actually a lot hotter than it is today, we had a lot of sunspot activity. All right, and the Navy worries about sunspots because of communication satellites that start to get a lot more CME activity, and it interferes with the electrons that make up all of our communication protocols, right? But if the sun was actually a burning furnace of combustible material, there wouldn't be any blackness in the center. It would be completely combustible no matter if there's a divot, a vortex down inside. If it was pooling down inside, you would either have a black hole on the surface of the sun to create that deprivation of photons, or you would actually have, maybe, this electrical mass that is sort of wobbly, right? A plasma ball would necessarily have a uniform, complete uniform distribution in it. But if it were to send some of its electrical mass out, all right, it would punch a hole in its own surface, right? Creating this deprivation of stuff burning on the outside, and then you would have this hole into the bowel of the sun, and which would be a dark hole because it's not burning up inside in the traditional thermal nuclear way that we think it's doing on the rest of the sun. And we still believe that's the way that the sun's atmosphere works, the sun's surface works. There's also scientists that are not part of Flat Earth at all that have studied the crawling combustion on the surface of the sun. They're saying, look, we can create those patterns on Earth if we have an electrical ball. It's like a steel ball, and we put a material on the outside and cook it with electricity. It kind of worms. It crawls in these wormy little paths because of electricity and the way electricity behaves. So we think that's why the sun is an electrical ball. And that's not Flat Earth people. That's just normal cutting-edge cosmologists on planet Earth, people that are way past Stephen W. Hawking's mothball theories, right? So most of you have been in the forest at some point. There have been some cloud-covered moment in your life where the sun's beams beam through the cloud cover. And it's this gorgeous, majestic, godlike image, right? Where you have the sun, it's some center point of light. And you have these beams that seem to progressively go towards the sun. You know, it's this variable vectoring of the sun. And what the flat earthers have sort of suggested is, look, if this was an ambient light 93 million miles away, then those beams wouldn't converge so violently towards a center light source, which is what we see when the sun beams volumetric light through the clouds. You can just look up on Google sunbeams through the clouds, or even just sunbeams, and you're going to see these photographs that you've seen forever that are, look like fairy tale enchanting photographs. And what they're saying is if you trace the beams back in any photograph of volumetric light and then take the sextant's measurements of where the sun is said to be, both mathematic models are congruent, putting the sun roughly 3,200 miles in the sky. Now, there's physicists that say that, it's just the way that the sun essentially does have a clustering focal point when you do look at the sun from where it is in space, and it hits these atmospheric anomalies like clouds, and it does hit and distribute, and it creates these, there's a name for it, I forgot what it's called, but it does create these beams. Now, I think if that was true, then if you measured those vectors back, it wouldn't coincide with what the sextant says on a clear day. Right? The sextant's working with the sun on a clear blue sky. All right, it just gets weirder and weirder and weirder, right? So again, all we're proving is that there's questions to be answered, if nothing else, about this flat Earth theory, right? Now, the guy that worked for NASA, who's now turned into a stand-up comedian, which obviously you can attach. I used to work for NASA, now I'm a comedian, and anything he says is going to be deprecated because he's a jokester, right? He knows how to tell a good joke. His thing is that he was a credible artist, credible painter. And he said that his job, this is all his knowledge, right, was to create images for NASA that were believable, photorealistic images. And I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure he was a Photoshop guy too, but he was also a hand painter that was amazing at what he did. I think he did evolve his talents into the Photoshop before he lost his career in that realm. I don't know if he left or whatever. He tells a story. I'm just bringing you this just so you can kind of round out your knowledge of this stuff, and so it's not a surprise when you hear it from him. What he says is the following. He says is that on one of his first weeks at NASA, someone was talking about someone flying somewhere on planet Earth, and they were talking about someone heading towards the Antarctica. And his claim is that his associates who had worked there for decades before him brought him, they basically made the joke that if someone were to fly in the path that was being discussed in this random serendipitous meeting, that they would have hit the border of the dome that actually encapsulates the Earth on a flat Earth model. And being an intelligent person himself, academically as well as artistically, he's laughing his ass off. He's like, it's funny. And these guys supposedly, according to his story, looked at him very solemnly, very seriously, and said, well, maybe it's time that you understood how the Earth is actually put together so that when we're doing what we're doing, maybe you understand why we're doing it and how important it is that we do it. And he describes the story of them taking him into a room and then showing him the UN logo and saying, this is how the world's actually laid out. It's flat. The outer border is the Antarctic ice border. And that our job is to convince the world it's heliocentric, because it sort of makes man accept its limitations without actually perceiving there's a limitation. So if we thought we were in a petri dish of flat Earth, right? Well, shit, man. Man wants to find everything that exists in the universe. There'd be a bunch of us, like the Truman Show. We go out to the edge and try to penetrate it and figure out where the hell we are. Who's keeping us in this dome? Who's in charge? What is this all about, right? If we're in this petri dish, it seems like we'd be an experiment. And who knows? Let's just say that that's true theory, and outside is maybe hell, fire and brimstone and demons and shit. Who knows, right? And maybe someone's been convinced of something derivative of that scare tactic, and they're like, look, it's better we're in here. You have no idea how utopian it is in this dome. And we're lucky to be in this dome. So we're not supposed to penetrate outside. It's what God made. Let's put it that way. There's going to be a God science thing at this end of this deal. But anyway, they explain this to him, and he just he's almost looking at him in his opinion. He's done a lot of sofa interviews about this, and he's like, I'm looking at these guys like, you're pulling my leg. This is what you do to a first-day artist to see how stupid and gullible I am. But the caveat to the story is that they never recanted their theory. They never pulled him aside and said it was a prank. They operated every single day as if that was true. Now, he didn't say that they continued mentioning the fact it's flat Earth, and they didn't, assign him things to say, this is because it's flat Earth and you're going to make it look round. So he just said that in his first couple weeks on the job, or a couple months on the job, someone explained this to him in front of a crowd of everyone else who does that job. So a small collection of men who were doing this job. Go figure, man, right? So I think his name is Matthew Blayland or something like that. I think I said his name wrong in the other episode, but just look up Matthew Flat Earth and you'll find this guy's stand-up comedian stuff. And he's actually pretty damn funny. I mean, if nothing else, you'll get a good, entertaining show out of his. He does a presentation where his comedy bit is showing all these pictures of the Earth and satellites and his paintings and paintings that are pieces of synthesized photos of the Earth that have been officially released by NASA as real photographs. He just tears them to shreds in front of you. So nothing else, he'll call into question everything you've ever been told by NASA, which is how I started out this episode, right? Let's talk about some of the overlays onto this theory. Now, I said at the beginning of this episode that a lot of religions have all done their models of flat Earth, and it's amazing. Every region of planet Earth has come up with their own version of this flat Earth theory. Again, and the thing is, they all agreed it was a disk. Every single one of them agreed it was a disk. And they have other layers of reality outside the disk in a lot of theories, right? Some Europeans used to say it was on the back of a turtle. And the old famous question of the woman asked the scientist, well, if it's on the back of a turtle, then what's the turtle standing on? And the guy's famous answer was, it's turtles all the way down. A turtle. I don't get that at all, right? That's probably not a true theory. But one of the leading flat Earth guys, and I have respect for anyone's opinions, all right, man? I don't offer any solutions for you either, and I've been, because of the flight paths alone, my mind is just a little bit blown, all right? The assertion is that we have been told that the world's heliocentric because it makes us less significant in the universe. It makes us calm down, as it might be, and our bone to explore where we are sort of calms down. Because again, we believe that we can't travel the speed of light. There's no way of leaving this ball in the perceivable future. So whoever's in control of us now, just suck it up because they're the ones that are going to remain in control of us. But the lead flat earthers are very religious too, very Christian-based religion. They believe in Jesus Christ being a real human being on planet Earth at some point in time. I wrote a movie about an Irish Jesus who was the first time the story is really reported as being told was 2500 BC, and his name was Cuchulainn, which means dog of Colin. And when I did my research on this, I was sort of blown away that the archetype of Christ was in this guy 2,500 years before Christ was ever rumored to exist. There was a battle between Connacht and Ulster, which is the northern part of Ireland. The god Lugh sent his only son down to save these factions from fighting, and he manages to settle the war, balance out the powers, and then he dies at the very end and rises to be with his father. It's also where the finale to Romeo and Juliet actually came from, because he dies with his woman at the end. All right. As Europe took over Ireland, and as the retelling of the story under this name Christ came back around, and the Christ became a huge control apparatus for Rome, right? Rome Rome got too big for its britches and couldn't send legions into all the cities and control them, so they created the story of Christ to say, tax yourself, it's in the name of God, and behave. And then, of course, a lot of people didn't believe, so after about 1,000 years of problems with that and, crusades that went totally bonkers all over Europe, they started doing the Inquisition for several hundred years, right? Each region of the world did a few hundred years of the Inquisition. Essentially was the way that Mao got rid of all of the intellectuals in the world, and they essentially got persecuted if you had an original thought outside of the paradigm of Christ. So the story of Christ was pounded into the genome of mankind, which is why we feel guilty saying that he doesn't exist or never existed. There's about 13 versions of the story of Christ. It goes back to the Egyptians, for God's sakes, right? Pardon the pun. So, for me, anyone asserting that the story of Christ has anything to do with the flat earth is a little bit weird, but let's just take the story of Christ out and let's keep God. Their theory is that God made this dome and put us in it, sort of like a Garden of Eden, but big enough that we don't explore where we are because it's big enough we don't feel like we're captives. Because, what their theory is that when we did believe in flat earth, we felt special. And, of course, the first theories of Earth and its relationship to the universe was that we are at the center of the universe and that the universe spins around us. Well, when you look at those bold photographs of the stars and the fact that we're moving in all kinds of vectors around space, the fact that they don't wobble a little bit from their perfectly circular thing, these guys now have a leg to stand on until some astronomer comes in and explains it to us, right? I got 103 in college astronomy without taking a single note, and I can tell you right now, I don't have an explanation for those bold photographs, and maybe I'm just an idiot in that realm of science, but I'd love to have someone explain that one to me. There was a guy who did a great documentary that was very quick on YouTube's, and he did first an analysis of the way we have figured out how to keep animals in captivity such that they don't become a problem. And he started out with a mouse in a tiny aquarium. And he said that when you put a mouse in an aquarium, it's obviously used to a lot more real estate to live, and it knows it's in some sort of captivity. And he said that on a particular interval, the mouse will try to scavenge the edge of the aquarium, trying to find its way out. But then it will give up, and it will live in the center for a little while. But on the same interval, it's a bizarre almost clock inside this mouse's brain. It will scavenge the edge completely. Every day it'll probably touch the edge, but this is a digging that goes around the outside edge in this weird interval. Okay, you feel me? When they create wildlife where they try to encapsulate a bunch of, or captivate a bunch of animals in the wildlife, they've realized when they made it too small, the animals all tried to break the fences down in the same unique interval of their biology. They knew they were captive, and so they tried to get out. But when you create a, say, 2,500 acre span of land and you put 10 cows in the center, they tend to feel like they're not captive, and so they never scavenge for an edge. And this guy did an amazing analysis of what if flat earth is real with a dome over the top to protect us from whatever the elements are outside, this ice border on the outside edge, and big giant continents that are way bigger than mankind. Again, we're just a tiny fungus on the surface of the earth. Even though we might be causing problems for the earth, we're not much, He did the ratios of our size to our space, which is the surface of this earth, flat or round. And he says you won't go search for the edge because you don't feel like you've had it. If you live, 100 years, you will not have seen the majority of the planet Earth, no matter if you're a billionaire or not. You might have seen every single continent, every single state, every single balkanized area of the world, but you won't feel like you're captivated, so you won't go searching for it. So he says the Earth seems to be a perfect size to make us feel like we're not captivated, or captured inside some container. I thought that was brilliant. And then he went one step further and he said, well, what if someone did try to get off this thing? What if someone woke up and felt like they were in the Truman Show? Okay. Well, think about when you try to go anywhere outside of the flat earth model. When you leave the continents, right, what do you experience immediately? Any of you have surfed? you know that the ocean is a saltwater body, and it's unpleasant. First time I surfed, oh my God, I wasn't aware of how much I needed to keep the water out of my body. And so, when you're in a pool, you might jump in the pool. I was a lifeguard for years, and you get in the pool, and who cares? You drink a little bit of the water, you spit a little bit of the water out. It's chlorine, makes your eye feel bad, but you can ingest it. If you go into Havasu Lake, clean, flat body of water, it's beautiful. You can spend all day there and you're okay. But when I surfed my first morning, I got so salt logged that I felt massively dehydrated, and I beelined from the coast to a McDonald's, which I never eat at, and I got the biggest Dr. Pepper I could possibly get, and I sat there and inhaled this thing to balance out my blood sugar levels because I had completely disrupted the pH balance of my body. Well, the ocean is a formidable body of water. You can't use it to drink when you're a sailor, right? We don't put desalination plants on most boats, maybe like a giant aircraft carrier. I'm sure they do that, right? But it's an obstacle to movement between the continents. Okay, because none of the continents touch the Antarctica. You have to cross this ocean to get there. A natural barrier. What also happens when you go to the South Pole? It gets cold as hell, right? And so you start hitting the cold barrier as you go towards the South Pole, whether it's an island or a barrier around the outside. And you don't want to be there unless you're really dedicated. And there was a guy named Colonel Byrd who, again, went down there on behalf of the military and did get on the coast of this body of ice and look around. He said, man, there's amazing resources out there. I mean, there's infinite oil, infinite coal. It's tremendous down there. But for some weird reason, the corporations that seem to have no problem getting oil from the bottom of the ocean, all these other formidable places, these tough terrains, will never go down there and get it. And the whole place is protected by military now, right? Supposedly if you take a boat and you just try to go to the coast, they'll shoot you out of the water. Bad news. So there's a military industrial complex that protects this region, and it's just naturally tough. I guess it's 300 miles inland before you get to the center of what's supposed to be the South Pole. And to do that, it's, again, extremely cold, colder than the North Pole, because, again, with the flat Earth, the sun is closer to the North Pole than it is the South Pole with the spotlight theory, and so it's much colder down there. All right. What if you try to go in the air and try to escape the dome, escape space, escape the gravitational pull of Earth on a heliocentric model? Well, it gets massively cold, and the air that we have to breathe goes away. So you integrate a hot air balloon. Well, the balloon is going to freeze to death up there. You're going to freeze to death, especially as a mortal man. What if you try to dig through the bottom of the Earth? Well, it's pretty damn thick for one thing, and if you were able to infinitely dig with some infinite machine, well, you're going to hit the mantle of this horrible, liquid steel. I mean, it's liquid iron, it's liquid earth, and it'll burn you up. Your machine will disappear because the melting level of any machine that you create is not going to withstand the heat that's down there. So we have a natural barrier in all directions from exploring anything outside of the continents that we have access to. And again, when you make it flat Earth, it becomes romantic and interesting that maybe we're in some captive thing, right? Again, just gets weirder and weirder. But that's sort of a circumstantial assertion onto the theory, which I just think makes it more interesting, right? Now, what I'm going to leave you with is the following. There's an organization that manages all the policies with the South Pole. I don't know where they are. I'm not exactly sure what their name is, but I've seen photographs of their meetings. And it's really, really weird. Okay? They build a room that is a triangle configuration of desks that everyone's sitting at to have this meeting. They line these desks with white cloth. What color is ice? Ice is white. All right, so they've created this barrier in the room, a symbolic barrier of this room in a pyramid formation, which is kind of funny. It's indicative of the power structure and the compartmentalization in which we believe runs the world. That's probably why it's a triangle, not a round circle. In the center of this room, they could have just left it blank. They could have let the press sit in the middle and film everybody like they do in Senate hearings. But they didn't. They built a triangular island out of props in the center of the room with little fake trees. They're going a triangle formation, okay, a pyramid formation, except the pyramidal stone, the capstone of this triangle in the center, is missing. So it kind of goes up, makes a flat tip to this pyramid. It's lush and green in the center, and the desks are all surrounded with white cloth. Well, the shape's probably wrong, but the metaphor is on point for the flat earth theory. A barrier of ice around the inhabitable region in the center. And that's how the people that run the policies of the South Pole arrange their room when they have meetings about it. And just, you can find it on the internets, okay? I just think that's weird, you know? Why would you do that? It's probably got to be the worst configuration for use of space in a square room, a rectangular room, to create a triangular formation in there. But the triangular formation, I think, is paying homage to the power structure and how it all works, right? If they consider themselves knowledgeable about the outer perimeter of a encapsulated dome world, right, then they're perceive themselves as the pyramid structure of command over the center area, if nothing else, to the proxies that might talk to those areas. I guess, wait a minute, there's one more I want to give you. This is a Steve Jobs presentation. But wait, there's one more. There was a private rocket team in Utah that broke the world's record for altitude of a private rocket. And they built this beautiful rocket, I don't know, maybe like 15, 20 feet tall, a few feet, in diameter on this rocket. And they shot it into the sky in late June of 2014. I want to say it's like the 23rd to the 28th, and they shot this thing about 11 o'clock in the morning. And when they shot this thing in the sky, it went really, really high. I can't remember exactly how high it was, but it broke the world's record for a private rocket going into the sky. And it landed just a few miles away from its launch pad area. Okay. Well, again, if the world's rotating at 1,000 miles per hour, once something leaves the Earth's atmosphere, leaves the Earth's surface, the gravitational pull weakens, and this thing would have probably been about 200 miles away, which is what they calculated if it had been on a heliocentric Earth. But that's not the interesting thing. The interesting thing is, as soon as this rocket took off, they had cameras all over this thing, HD cameras, something you never see from NASA, especially when they go to these secret places, right? Actually, you do every once in a while, but it's not as common as it should be. But things started spinning in a circle as it went up. So the fuselage of this rocket's spinning, and it's spinning super duper fast. And they're filming the Earth going away. The weird thing was, the sun was in the sky, and it was in all the shots with one of the cameras. But the one shooting off to the side, on a bunch of its rotations, saw the moon off to the side. Now you might think, big deal, dude. The moon's out all the time during the day. It's not like it's going to be the end of the world. Except that this particular time of the year, in 2014, the moon was on the other side of the planet from Utah. Almost a straight line through the Earth to the other side of the Earth. No matter how high this rocket went up on that particular day, it would have been impossible to see the moon, especially a crescent moon, right? But it was in the shot as a crescent moon. Now, if you had a flat Earth, that crescent moon would work out perfect in the shot because, again, it's just out of your view because of perspective vanishing. It's not visible when you're on the surface of Utah. But when you go way up in the sky, you'd start to see it off to the side because it would come into view, right? You'd be up high enough to look down on it or look at least over to the side. Remember, they said it's only 3,200 miles in the sky, both the moon and the sun. With the sextant and the light beam vector reverse engineering, it's only 3,200 miles in the sky. So the guy slowed it down, filmed it, went to NASA simulation software that's online and found that the moon was on the other side of the planet on that particular day and said, "What's up, guys? How did you see the moon in this shot?" And the funny thing was, in the YouTube comments of this little tiny documentary, the owner of the rocket, supposedly, you see his comment in the bottom, he goes, "I am the owner of this rocket. This footage is legitimate," meaning it is the real footage. We didn't edit it to put the moon in there. "Please contact me." And I have no idea where that went. So I started thinking about this whole thing. I thought, well, what if both theories are wrong? Heliocentric as we know it's wrong. Flat Earth is not quite right either. There does seem to be some curvature to the Earth based on the footage of this guy taking a picture of a city far away on his vacation, and then we did see that the bottom of the buildings were not visible because of the swell of the ocean. Literally, it was just ocean between where the guy was standing and where he took this video. And he didn't walk up and down the beach to create different heights. That was his point when he took the footage. And it's been fairly debunked that there was a swell in the ocean, and it did stop the bottom of the visible light at the bottom of these buildings. All right. I don't know why this thought occurred to me, but what if the Earth was massive? It was round, but it was so massive, much bigger than what we think it is. Okay, let's say it's 80,000 miles across as opposed to 8. So 10 times the spherical curvature, which means that 8-inch drop-off is not going to happen. It'd be... I guess it'd be 1/10 of an 8-inch, so it'd be 1/8 of an inch. Might fall in 1 mile. So it means 100 miles out, you're not going to see much disappear. What if we were just a patch, a round patch on top of a big heliocentric ball, which might have other patches of other worlds on the surface of a gigantosphere? And, maybe the anomalies with the sun and the moon are still orbital, but they're far, far away, or maybe they're not so far away. Who knows? But the massive amount of what this thing might be different. Might change all the mathematics of what we see. Or maybe in some weird way, it does have a dome over it, and somehow they're able to keep these bodies up there due to something we don't know about gravity. It's weird. It's really, really strange. This is a super long episode, I'm just realizing, so I'm going to button it up there because I could go on for days and days and days. So we're in dire need of some official answers as to all of the questions. There's a guy that came out with, I believe, 100 reasons why the Earth is flat. We need someone to go through all 100 reasons and not do flippant answers and not do this guy's a tinfoil hat answers. We need someone to say, okay, this is what you're seeing. Here's a computer simulation that mocks the surface of the Earth, 8,000 miles wide, heliocentric, going around all these bodies in space. This is why your bulb photograph shows a perfect bunch of stars going in a circle. This is why you don't see vanishing points over Lake Michigan. This is why the sunbeams do what they do. And this is why we don't travel over the Antarctica. This is why we have no direct flights across southern hemisphere continents. Across bodies of oceans between continents. We need someone to get in here and answer some of these questions. It doesn't mean you have to believe it all. It just means that, damn, why doesn't NASA have a catalog of 20,000 photographs of Earth from really far away, the whole thing, right? Why are the same storm systems appearing all over Earth? Why is the 12-hour rotation of Earth fail to show any storms moving? You can't look at a cloud in the sky for 10 minutes and it be the same thing 10 minutes later in your cell phone photograph. I know you feel me. Let's keep the debate going. Just want to say, I don't think anyone researching this is an idiot. I think, quite frankly, there's a million reasons to ask questions in this thing, and we just need to keep pushing forward. If you haven't already, go to mkultraradio.com. That's where these episodes center themselves. I'm not sure when we're going to get back to our normal show, but I'm sure we will. I guess these are rules that rule us, right? We're somewhere in space. It may not matter. We still have to go pay our bills and live a normal life. I don't know if finding out we were in a Truman bubble is going to change anything. I don't know how one would define being significant in the universe versus being insignificant in the universe. It's basically what you build out of it, how you make your life interesting or not interesting, productive or not productive, full of love or full of hate. It's all up to you. So I don't think we're in some death spiral of morality if we happen to believe heliocentric over flat Earth or vice versa. We still have to live. We still have to be good to each other. We still have to fix this planet because it's definitely being run by some people. If flat Earth were true, maybe the only thing we could use that realization to undo is perhaps the lies that have been told all over the planet throughout history. Maybe. I look forward to your comments. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Please like if you haven't liked. Please comment on this one. Let's get the debate going. Hope this was valuable for you guys because I do not have the answers. I just have questions at this point. All right, guys. Like I always say, take care of yourself and somebody else on this either flat or round earth. And I'll see you in the next episode. Over now.